Scruffy Politics here. Here I am, and here's Brett with Scruffy Politics. Well, Brett, today I guess we will discuss why the Republican Party, the Republican and the Democratic Party are both unrelatable and how they can go to their extremes.
Okay, so I agree with this to some degree, but naturally, from my position, I feel like the Democrats are more extreme than the Republicans. But I agree that there is extremism on both sides, and you definitely see it when people are trying to primary each other. Like in the last couple of cycles, the Republicans did run some candidates that they weren't mainstream politicians, and as a result, they ended up losing. So, and I
Well,
think probably the best evidence of that is what happened in the midterm elections. I mean, Republicans got this Dobbs decision, and it really sent all of the independents running towards the Democrats, and then we ended up losing big time in the midterms.
what I think causes the Republican Party to lose people is especially independents. Whereas where I would maybe vote Republican, but then when I see Republicans going so extreme to defend like Donald Trump and uh, you know looking like they're more on Russia's side and the ugliness of Donald Trump's behavior and how the Republicans have not been the adult in the room, I think, when they post on social media. I mean, you have people like Lauren Boebert, Marjorie Taylor Greene, who I think is just despicable. You have people like a Ted Cruz, who um, has no problem when Donald Trump calls his wife ugly, but yet he will still kiss Donald Trump's feet. And Lindsey Graham, Trump, you know, uh, put out his phone number for the world to see, and Lindsey Graham is still like, "Oh, Donald Trump, you're so funny," and Donald Trump could care less about these guys, and it's just crazy how they're so loyal to one guy who, before he became a real contender in 2016, they all hated him. They told the truth about him and about how he was a failed businessman, a con man, how he was just not a good guy. And now that he's in power, oh, they kiss the ring.
Well, that's true, but everything you just said, you have the equal and opposite reaction on the left with AOC and uh, I'm drawing a blank on her name, the representative from Somalia,
Okay, I don't
Minnesota.
know.
Um, and then well, the squad basically. There was like what, four or five of them. Remember, there was Jamal Bowie was his name, the guy who remember he was trying to stall one of the votes, so he pulled the fire alarm, and
Oh,
then he
really?
said it. Oh, you don't remember that?
I,
He
I,
said
I
it was an
wasn't aware of
accident.
that. I do remember something about a fire alarm being pulled,
Yeah.
but
So he actually already got voted out. He lost in the primary to I think so, or maybe it was I can't remember now if he lost in the primary or if he lost in the election. But yeah, he's already out, so he lost his seat. Probably not just because of that, but I mean, again, just one of those things. If Republican had done that, Democrats, you would never hear the end of it. Every news media organization would have ran with, crazy person Matt Gaetz pulled the fire alarm to stop a vote because the Democrats were going to lose or didn't want the vote to
well,
go through,
well,
you know.
yeah,
So I feel like they have the same extremes on the Democrat side, you know.
yeah. I just think though, when thinking about January 6th, and it was a while ago though, how many Republicans still defended that, and how many, and it's just crazy that Donald Trump was the Republican nominee again after America saw what happened on January 20th and the harmful effects it had on people. There were cops who got injured and died because of that, cops who committed suicide after that, and Republicans, the really extreme ones, just want to deny all of it, and it I just find that to be pretty disturbing when we talk about a democracy and we look at,
So
yeah.
So again, on the same side, okay, you had January 6th, you also had the Summer of Love, referred to as BLM, where
Yep.
people were out burning cities down. Now, how many of those people were actually arrested? How many were actually charged? And you had key lawmakers in Congress on the Democrat Party who were supporting this protest. They were saying, hey, this is right. This is democracy. These people have a right to be out there in the street. I mean, some of them had completely extreme statements. Like, I think it was Nancy Pelosi who said, frankly, I don't think they should stop. I think they should keep going until they get what they want. So it's like, oh, so you're justifying them burning police stations to the ground to get their way?
Well,
I
that's
mean, the thing
why.
is, to me, you can't really compare BLM and January 6th because what happened in BLM was the Democrats rallied around those troublemakers, and very few of them were charged. They were arrested and then immediately released, or maybe given a ticket, which once they got to court, the judge threw out. The January 6th people was a completely different situation. The entire Washington, D.C. federal system hated these people and threw the book at them. Many of them were denied actual legal constitutional rights. They were held without being charged. So, I mean, if a cop arrests you, they're supposed to, act with a certain speed and say, okay, Steve, we've arrested you. Here's what we're going to charge you with. Now you have the right to go get a lawyer and you get to fight this in court. But they arrested people on January 6th and they let them sit for 6 months and never even charged them. They didn't even say why they're in jail. And then they also denied bail. In the meantime, so the January 6 people, they denied their bail. But in the meanwhile, you have states like Illinois, which you know well. And what were they doing at the same time? Dropping bail for everybody. So you had actual criminals in Chicago that have to get arrested and they get out immediately because of no bail. But if you were walking around with an American flag on the Capitol grounds on January 6th, you didn't get any bail. You had to go to jail, and you had to sit there and wait until they told you what you were being charged with.
True. You bring up good points, and yes, the Democrats, they drop the ball when it comes to crime and what the police can or cannot do. The police were told to just lay back, hold back and just let them loot the stores and everything. And that's the fault of the Democratic mayors that have failed Chicago and Minneapolis. Just, I mean, that's a bad thing. But then again, if we go on comparing, throughout life, nothing is fair. So just because that happened with the Black Lives Matter protest, it doesn't give the excuse that January 6th can happen and those people can't be held accountable. I mean, of course, life is not fair. I bet there's someone out there who could steal from a store every day and get away with it. And I bet you there could be someone like me who I could attempt to steal and I would be caught like that probably. It just
Well,
depends on the situation.
here's the difference, I think. Um, Democrats wholeheartedly supported BLM while it was taking place. And they did everything. In fact, remember, that was one of the big controversies with Kamala, that she actually fundraised for a group that was involved in legally getting these people out of trouble. So she was many of these people. Now, Joe Biden, to his credit, was not, right? But many Democrat top officials were 100% on board with defund the police. So they were saying that, hey, we have to take money away from the police departments. We need to let these people blow off steam, do what they want. But the juxtaposition I was going to say is on the J6 side, many people who support, the right side of the fence, people like myself, many of us immediately came out and said January 6th was wrong. It shouldn't have happened. Trump should have came out earlier and told everyone to stop and go home. Everyone that I know or everyone I've heard talk on the subject has said anybody that assaulted a police officer or damaged property, if you broke a door or broke a window or damaged anything in the Capitol, they should absolutely be prosecuted. But there was so many people that ended up in that building, and the police just gave up to the point where, here's my problem. Why weren't the police telling people as they were walking through the door? They just stood there. Why didn't they tell them, hey, Steve, by the way, you can come in and walk around, but you are creating a felony for yourself, and you will be prosecuted when this day is all over. Now, if they would have told you that, I bet you would have turned around and left. But they didn't say that to anybody.
Well, I I think there were police that did, but because the crowd was so ferocious and rushing in, I mean, the police were outmanned, were
So,
outnumbered.
so here's my question: If is a police officer supposed to watch you do a crime and not say anything, and then come to your house a month from now and arrest you for it? Or when they see you committing a crime, are they supposed to go, "Hey, Steve, we're going to place you under arrest right now because you're doing something illegal"?
Well, that's a different circumstance because it's not like you're going to the store stealing something, the cop watches it, lets you go, then comes to your house. This is where the cops were outnumbered by citizens that were going in, and then they had to review tapes. And it's kind of like a lot of times whenever there's like a murder or a theft somewhere, and you have to review the tape and find the person and get the information and the picture out online for people to see. That is
So,
more like the case.
so here I can use a even more recent example. We had all these protests at colleges over the Palestinian thing, right? How many of those? We had video, right? The same tools that the feds used for January 6th to identify and arrest those people. Are you telling me those tools disappeared? They weren't available to arrest any of these troublemakers at the colleges? I mean, we literally had people here in Michigan at University of Michigan. They were threatening the lives of the administrators. And those people weren't arrested.
Yeah,
In
I
fact,
think a
actually,
lot has to do with.
I think I heard of one incident where they arrested four of them because they were actually protesting at one of the administration officials' homes, and then they were released the next day. No charges.
Yeah, well, I think a lot of it has to do with like if they were being violent or not. But a lot of times the cops have their hands tied, which is which is unfortunate, especially in major cities, as you've seen it in Chicago, where the cops don't have the backing of the mayor. The mayor could care less about the cops and will blame the cops for just about anything. So a lot of it, I think, has to do with that. Also, cops, and I think cops are afraid to do things at times too, because if a cop pulls someone over, they're gonna have to think about, okay, what if this turns into a situation where they don't cooperate, and then we do have to use force. They don't want to be
Hmm.
that cop who's on the news that night or the next
Right.
day, and then a Democrat is blaming the cop for something that happened that
So there's
that
two
the
other things
criminal did.
about January 6th that really bother me. One is there was all kinds of false reporting that said Trump did not request the National Guard troops. And it's well documented now that the actual facts of that are he did request the troops, and the troops were turned down by a couple of different people. One of them was the mayor of Washington, D.C., Muriel Bowser. She was one that turned them down. She specifically said it's a bad optic. We don't want people to see on television a militarized situation at the Capitol with people in riot gear that the National Guard would bring. It was also turned down by the two sergeant of arms who one report at that time to Mitch McConnell, and one reported to Nancy Pelosi. So based on their feedback from Mitch McConnell and Nancy Pelosi, they both said, no, we don't want that. They all agreed, we will let the D.C. Metro Police handle the situation. The National Guard is not needed. Now, the National Guard was still supposed to be in backup in case they had traffic accidents or something, I guess. Now, I don't know if you knew this, but the National Guard was actually physically located like 3 miles away, and they were ready. They were at their compound with gear on, ready to go on a moment's notice. They kept calling, asking for approval from the Capitol Hill Police and the Sergeant at Arms at the Capitol, and they waited like 4 hours. No one would give them the green light. They said they're not approved to come down there. And they finally got the green light. I don't know who gave them the green light, but they got the green light at like 6 p.m. that night, like after the whole thing was pretty much over. So many things about that just seem totally wrong, right? Like, why did they deny it in the first place? And second of all, why didn't they want the National Guard there? They didn't give them approval to come down when they were, like, they could have been there in minutes.
I've heard both sides of the story, and it's unfortunate what happened. Can I actually change the issue for a second?
Yes. Yes.
I think the Republicans, they do a really good job of using buffer issues to try to distract the public and bait the public. Like, for example, the trans issue, trans using the same bathroom as you. The Democrats fall right into that and respond right into it with, LGBTQ, pride pictures and all that stuff. They should just ignore it. Stop falling for the bait. And the biggest issue right now is not trans issues. It's crime, it's taxes, it's healthcare. And of course the Republicans, they don't like to discuss healthcare. The Democrats have been more on that side of wanting to improve healthcare. Yes, Obamacare was a mess, but at least there was something that, they gave effort to. Whereas, Trump, he doesn't even know what to do with healthcare. And so with this trans issue, and I don't really care about it, and I think it's just a distraction to keep your mind off of other things, to bait the public, like, oh, there's, this is a huge problem in America, when we wake up and we're concerned about our lives, we're concerned about our income, we're concerned about taxes, crime, and healthcare. I'm not waking up and I'm not thinking about a trans person, in the morning.
True, and actually that probably helped Trump win, because they said one of his best ads was that ad where they talked about jails providing free taxpayer-funded transgender affirming surgical care or whatever. But again, that's kind of a boomerang effect, because the Democrats are the ones that kept pushing that. The Democrats pushed mostly through academia this ideology, and it really caught steam with that Riley Gaines when she ended up losing. I don't know have you heard her interview on that?
I have not heard the interview. But I agree with her. She was the swimmer, right?
Yes.
Yeah, and it was Leah Thomas who.
Yes.
Yeah.
Basically, the point I want to make is the interview was in that famous situation. What happened was they had literally a photo finish. They were tied, right? Mm-hmm. So the college people administering the race had to make a judgment call. And they literally told this Riley Gaines, they said, sorry, we have to go with Leah Thomas because we have to uphold these values of supporting the LGBT community. So even though you're completely even, you're completely tied, there is a benefit to us to support this person over you. And that's the route they decided to go. And she literally had to stand there on the podium next to this person who got to accept the gold or whatever it was. I don't know. I'm not an expert on sports and swimming, but
Yeah, I found that really messed up. I mean, I did,
but
but
again, Democrats pushed that, and now it boomeranged back on them in this election because I think there was many things, but you're right. That's one thing where people are really fed up with hearing the Democrats always trumpet that because they make it seem like such a large group, and it's not. Even the LGBT community is like what? It's like less than 2% of the American population, and the people who identify as trans is like less than half a percent. So it's a very small group. It doesn't really affect most of us. Most people, you nailed it. Most people are concerned with their gas price, their food prices, education for their kids, their housing situation, their car. They need a car to get to work. I mean,
yeah, yeah, so that's where I think both parties throw us off. The Democrats try to come back with it as, oh, they go so extreme that people like me are thrown off. But then again, I realize what the Republicans are doing. They're fear mongering everyone into thinking, you know, trans issues are the biggest problem in your life when you will most likely never or rarely know if you're in the same bathroom as someone who's trans.
yeah, true. I mean, I see your point because, I mean, the problem is when you get to, the reporting. I mean, most people are getting this from some news organization or maybe a podcast or whatever. But I just noticed like a lot of these news personalities, they engage in major hyperbole. That's the word I use to describe it, hyperbole. Hyperbole is when you say something so outlandish, it's like completely fake, right?
Yeah.
And like you would hear them talking about like how this became an issue with the trans and LGBTQ thing where they were talking about books in the library. Well, then the Democrats you would hear on the news and they'd say, "Oh, Republicans want to burn books. Like we're Adolf Hitler and we want to burn Bibles now or something." It's like, "No, that's not true." But then you start looking at some of these books and you're like, "Okay, these are books for like kids that are 10 years old and they're talking about gay sexual experiences. Why is that in a library? That shouldn't be in a library." And if some parent wants to remove it, I don't think it makes them a Nazi, like they want to burn all the books in society, you know?
Yeah. Yeah, and that should definitely be on the school district and the board and the parents and the community. There should always, the parents should always have a voice in that when it comes to schools. Yeah. And then could I bring up the NRA and
Yeah.
how I think the Republicans? It seems like the Democrats are the ones that always want to fix uh, the gun problems, the gun
Yeah.
issues here in America. With school shootings, with mass murders, and I understand even if you make tighter laws and more restrictions, there will still be murder, and that will never go away. But at least with having stricter background checks, there's some states you could just walk into a gun store and buy a gun without a background check, which I think is crazy. And the Republicans aren't. They don't want to piss off the NRA because they get their money from the NRA. They're graded from the NRA. They think it's like a huge accomplishment if the NRA gives them a good grade. And the Democrats, of course, they think it's a great accomplishment if the NRA gives them an F. But the Republicans, I think, are losing on this issue with guns because they should do something to address the concern. And then whenever they address, mental health, right? There's a lot of times with where Democrats have tried to pass mental health bills, and then Republicans stomped on it and they stopped it, and yeah, and that.
Well, so I can speak very well to this issue. So first of all, one thing you said there was that you can go into a place and get a gun without a background check. the laws do vary by firearm and they do vary by state, but in general, most every single state in the United States, depending on the type of gun that you're getting, I think specifically handguns, there might be some shotguns that maybe you don't need as much of a check, but to my understanding, every single handgun, every state in the United States does require a federal background check, and I believe also a waiting period. So it's not like you can go in and say, yeah, I want this handgun right now, and then you walk out the door. Typically, that process, they will say, okay, we have to do a federal background check, and then we will notify you in 36 hours once the waiting period is done, and then you've passed the federal background check. Um, so I hear stuff like that all the time in the media, and it's amazing how many people in the news don't know what they're saying when it comes to guns, because they'll even say the same thing. I always hear this on news, or Barack Obama was famous for saying it, the gun show loophole. The gun show loophole, they used to say. And they would create this illusion that you can just go to a gun show and you can buy a gun right off the table and put it in your back pocket and walk out the door. I've been to several gun shows. Guess what? The people who sell guns at gun shows have a federal firearm license. So they also require you to go through the background check and abide by a waiting period. So I don't know where they come up with this gun show loophole, because that's not how it works. I mean, we should do it sometime. Take a camera and let's go to a gun show and say, hey, I can buy this and leave with it right now. It's not going to happen, because anybody that violates that, if you do find out, well, now you're engaging in illegal gun activity and you will lose your license and you're subject to prosecution because you didn't follow the federal law. In fact, many places are even very quick to stop what they call straw purchases. So if you've never heard this term, a straw purchase is, let's say you have a criminal background and you can't buy a gun, but I go buy it for you, right? So a lot of girlfriends will go in and buy guns for their boyfriends who have a criminal background and they can't pass the test. So if a girl comes in and the guy working the counter is like, sure, what can I help you with? And she starts asking questions, but it's clear that she doesn't know what she's talking about, that clerk actually in many states has the right to say, I'm sorry, we're not going to sell to you. Please leave. Because he's basically saying, I've identified that I don't think you're actually buying this gun for yourself. You don't seem to know what you're talking about. So you have to leave, because I believe you're probably trying to buy this for somebody else that can't pass a background check. So, but I do understand your point. There are several things. Like here in Michigan, they passed a law that you have to, if you have children, you have to have your gun in a locked case, because, kids will get a hold of it and play around and shoot themselves. In fact, there was a story here just recently that happened, unfortunately. A kid, I think there was a guy, he was sleeping with a gun under his pillow, and then somehow the kid got the gun and shot himself. I think he might have survived, but so, most of the people that I know that are involved with guns are in favor of those things. We don't want people getting hurt. We don't want the other stuff going on. But here's the fear for people, right? So when you talk about mental illness and that, so let's say the state passes a law that says, well, anybody that's ever taken an antidepressant, we feel would be a danger and therefore cannot own a gun, right? So what happens if you're like, oh, sorry, Steve, we looked into your background and it turns out you took Prozac when you were 18, so sorry, you just can't own a gun the rest of your life. I mean, I'm sure you're fine now, but, the fact of the matter is...
That would probably be half of America right there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, my aunt, for crying out loud, who's like 84 years old, calls them her happy pills. So she can't have a gun to protect herself because she takes her happy pills?
Yeah. Well, I think it would, be more for people with violent backgrounds that should not be able to have.
Every person that I know that has guns or supports guns is in favor of things that make sense. But what they're all afraid of is this slippery slope where Democrats come out with some law and then they basically use it to take advantage of people, you know, because we've seen all kinds of things. I don't know if you remember at one point, I think it was Rahm Emanuel when he was mayor of Chicago. He actually tried to stop the sale of ammunition in the city of Chicago, and that was his like trick to try to solve the problem. Right? He's like, "Oh, I just won't sell ammunition." Well, that goes against the Second Amendment. You can't do that.
Yeah.
But he was like, "I don't care. I'm going to do it anyway." He's like, "What good is a gun if you can't buy bullets? So I'll just make sure people in Chicago can't buy bullets." And it's like, okay, but dude, that's not a law. You're like skirting the Second Amendment to try to stop people from their legal right, you know? But here's another thing I want to say real quick because you brought up the mental health thing. The really sad part is every time there's one of these incidents, the Democrats automatically run to, well, we need to do something about the guns in our society. But every one of these cases, every time they interview the people, you find out that they were telling everybody they were going to do this. They were telling their parents, they were writing it in books, they were texting friends, and they were writing in chat groups and stuff, and they were telling everybody, I hate my life, I hate the world, I'm going to kill all these people. So in several of these situations we have where law enforcement was already involved with them and didn't do anything. So, I mean, you know, removing the guns, I don't think is 100% the answer, but we have to find a way to better identify when somebody is having a mental breakdown and they're writing stories in their book at school and they're telling their friends and they're telling basically everyone that will listen, we need to take them seriously, you know? And I'm totally in favor, like, hey, if someone thinks I'm crazy and you want to come into my house and take my guns and you say, hey, as long as a doctor gives you a green light, you can have these back in 3 months, I'd be in favor of that because that would have stopped some of these shootings. But the problem is, again, Republicans don't trust Democrats because what's the first thing that you would do? Naturally, you would say, oh, Donald Trump's unstable. He's obviously unstable. Let's raid Mar-a-Lago and take all of his weapons, right? And then the next day, guess what?
That might be a good idea.
Yeah, but one of the most, you know, one of the guys on the planet that everybody's been trying to kill, and you want to take away his right to self-defense, right? Because this is what I really, here's another thing that really bothers me. I always hear Democrats and they say, well, there's no reason for a magazine, a clip that holds so many bullets, right? How do you know who's coming to my house? You know? How do you know?
True, especially if you don't live where the police can, you know, come to you, you know,
yeah,
easily.
I think Joe Biden even said one time, or I don't know if it was Joe Biden, but somebody said something to the effect that you don't need any more than like 7 or 8 bullets. Really? So have you ever seen a YouTube video where like a car rolls up in the guy's driveway and 4 dudes chop out with guns and go into his house? So 4 guys armed come into your house, but the Democrats say you get to have 8 bullets, so I hope you're a great shot.
That's a good point. And it is it's a little over half hour now. So
Yep.
Time to wrap
Okay,
up.
so we'll go ahead and wrap this one up, and then we will do another one of these in a week on another topic, and keep it rolling.
Nice. Sounds good. Okay.
All right, see you later.
Okay.